anybody need to wriggle around or stretch for a little minute? You've already heard 3 people. So do that just for a second, and then I'll wake you up a bit. So what I wanted to do today, when we were talking about what would I talk about, one of the things is, I guess I work in 5 different countries now, and I work with companies, I work with governments, and a lot of my work is in 20 to 30 years, what will technologisation mean in all sorts of ways, in policy, in training, in what the workplace looks like, that kind of thing. But the other thing I reflected on in listening this morning was the skilling for life. So I guess I'm an example of that as well. So going from, and also I was an employer for 20 odd years, so I didn't go into a university and as in a PhD until I was 50. So I worked in power stations, coal mines, General Motors, pharmaceuticals, defence, all sorts of organisations and government for nearly 30 years. First as an anthropologist, which, well, that was actually Fiji, because I liked witchcraft and thought that was fascinating. And it's still very relevant to a lot of health and management. Dare I say politics. And the other aspect was psychology. And at 50, it was a case of seeing more technologisation, also working as an industrial manager and a person who dealt with employees all the time, and thinking, okay, this is about adaptive companies and adaptive systems. And so the PhD ended up being a double one in systems engineering and cognitive neuroscience. And what I didn't think about was artificial intelligence. So that wasn't on my radar, but that's right in the middle. And now I run my own small company, and I look at the neurophysiology of connection between humans and humans and technology. And it's taken me right into the roller coaster of the technologisation of everything. So you never know, but as long as you keep on training. And a large part of that for me is all of the different kinds of skills. And so I've taught in TAFE and used a lot of people through vocational training, and it's an absolutely critical part. And in a lot of countries, very well supported. And we just need to make sure that, you know, that we are and we fit in, and in this country, the different kinds of levels of skills. So, having said that, I'm used to walking around, so that's why I've got a lapel mic. A couple of things then I want us to think about this morning. So I can never, ever resist talking for a few minutes about the neuroscience of us. And it's because it's very relevant to you as an individual, but also you in the workplace. And what I'll do is talk about why that changes the way that people work together. And that will never change, no matter what technology rolls on, because there are things that we do that will always be the only thing that we can do, you know, those kind of positive things in the workplace and, of course, in life. So think about your brain as a work in progress. We know now that you build your brain all your life. And one of the lovely things about your brain is that it is very plastic. So we prune all the time, and we can build brand new connections. And we were talking last night about the size, 5 quadrillion parallel connections. It's, more than the stars. It's an amazing thing that you've got in here. And as you keep on working with it, and as you keep on doing new things and training, then you'll keep on growing new types of brain. So you shape it very much around what you pay attention to. And one of the major things to think about is how we shape our brain is often how much we interact with other human beings. So we shape our own brains, and we also shape each other's brains. And we now have ways consistently to look at that. And I actually put caps on people and watch how much interaction stimulates different parts of their brains. So the things to think about then are we have different sorts of neurons as soon as we interact, mirror neurons, subsets of neurons that pick up smiles, laughter, intent. We have spindle neurons that map where we sit in each other's social systems, and that makes a big difference in trust and connection, and they fire actually within about a 12th of a second. And we have resonance, so we now know that even the people sitting in this room, you are giving off chemicals to each other. You are resonating a number of chemicals that other people pick up. So endorphins, hormones, there's a number of chemicals going around. So that's why, say, women equilibrate hormones when they work together, and actually so do men and live together. You just don't know it as much, but you do it. So we have an awful lot of information going between us as human beings that we start to make chemical differences in each other, because we're very romantically electrochemical bags. That's what humans are. So from the kind of top to the bottom, we constantly stimulate in each other. And so I get really fascinated in the different ways that we now know through technology that we do it. So some of the work in Glasgow that I was involved in was looking at voice. Voice resonates at about 3 to 8 megahertz. There's parts of your brain that are always resonating at that pitch. That's what our ears pick up, which is why we hear human voices out of noise. And it connects to pleasure centers. It connects to how we then do that dance of watching another person and going down to their emotional level and cadence and all of those things. So we've got another way that we know that we resonate together and we pick up information. And what I now do is also look at what happens with direct eye gaze. So we can put caps on people and watch how much their socio and emotional areas light up when we look at each other and how much we stimulate it. And when you do that with young children, you're actually helping those hippocampal and amygdala areas to fire and to grow, and you're helping communication skills, and you're helping emotional skills and trust, but also empathy. But we can do it all our lives. So even older, I don't know, surgeons that sometimes I give talks to people around patient care and those sorts of things. And it doesn't matter what age, there's old people, surgeons that will come up and go, so I'm right then. So if I do actually talk to them and not just look gruff and professional, it makes them heal better. Yep, it sure does, because it changes their endocrine system. So we're amazing the way that we connect. And that's the kind of thing we can now look at in terms of people giving off these, I can't remember the exact electrical frequency, but we're giving off electrical frequency to each other when we interact. So knowing that then, what we get in places like the workplace is we get an alignment of values, which is quite strong, because you're actually picking up all sorts of data you don't realise in how people are thinking and how people are, what they're worried about, what they're listening to, those kind of things. The collaboration is bigger, higher, because the kinds of chemicals that we stimulate mean that people are much more comfortable with doing things that they might not normally do. So you'll take more risks. You'll say things because you know that people have got your back. So you're better at being innovative and creative. We can actually watch the creative, so that's creative ideation. So when people go into that creative phase, we can watch major parts of their brain all light up at once, instead of that kind of major salience network that starts to just direct activity in the brain. So we stimulate more and we have greater levels of activity. And the more you do that, the more neurons you grow. So you're actually growing new brain. If you are sufficiently engaged with people and sufficiently excited about what you're doing, then you actually hit the parasympathetic nervous system, that starts the immune system, that starts a cocktail of BDNF and other chemicals, and off we go. We can actually start mapping new neurons and new dendrites. So we're truly amazing when we interact. The other thing that happens is with that empathic pathway, we get more strategic. So I used to wonder why CEOs that were very good at connecting and listening were also better at strategic thinking. And it's because empathy is really important. It's a very lovely thing to have for all sorts of reasons. But one of the things that fascinated me that I looked at in the thesis was when you turn on the empathic pathway and you're trying to deal with an unknown, right, a complex problem, then the brain's lazy, but it's also wonderfully fast. So what it does is it says, okay, before I go out and get new information, I'm going to retrawl all of the data that I have sitting in all the different parts of the memories of my head. And what I'll do is do it very widely instead of going down a really linear path. Whereas if really linear thinkers, which we were thinking about last night, tend not to do that. So what we've got is if you've got an empathic capacity to talk to people and you've got that capability of thinking widely, you don't do what this is. So this is basically it's a map of why dumb people don't know they're dumb. And one of the major issues is what you get is the bottom quartile with people that perceive that they're really good at something. They always think they're much, much better than they actually are when you perform. And that sort of evens out until many people who are fairly canny about how capable they are, they get it about right, about how well they'll do. And then someone who's really good at something, do you notice they always underestimate? And it's because they know what they don't know. So the truly linear thinker, who doesn't sort of think laterally and who doesn't listen, will remain on that left-hand side. They'll always think they know a lot more than they actually know. And it's quite difficult to resist. And there's a lot of smiles. There's probably people that know. Maybe you are one, who know linear thinkers. But what we try and do, what tends to happen with empathic engagement and with that letting go of your own sort of biases and this is right and this is wrong, is you become much more of a complex thinker. And last night we were talking about whether or not you can train people to do that. And most of the time, yes, there are some who are just going to stay linear, but most people are on a bell curve. And the more you give them complex problems to solve and agency to get it wrong, the more their brain gets better. We actually grow more structures that allow for that pattern breaking and nodal connection like a spider web. And the better they get at solving complex problems. And that's whether you're teaching the students or whether you're working in an organisation as well, having to do with adaptive and complex problems. Because you look for different things. So your sieve, if you like, collects different information. And when you deal with people in an empathic way and you all try and look at complex or creative problems, then the other thing you do is you get very long lens. And so one of the things in Finland, because I'm on the steering committee for artificial intelligence in Finland, and we look at a lot of different aspects. And one of them, for me, is looking at the interesting rise in short-termism at all levels, and the rise in things like technology in intermediating people's direct interaction in trying to discuss or deal with complex problems. And it's a really interesting correlation. So getting together and dealing with complex problems and coming up with creative ideas and learning things is always going to be something that human beings do amazingly. And we'll talk about what technology, where technology has a role in that. So we can also shape negatively. So this is an example, just to show you it's not fluffy, of 2 3-year-old brains. On the left is a 3-year-old who's been stimulated and held and talked to and taught. And so their grey matters and their white matter has grown all the time because they've been stimulated even though they're pruning. On the right is a 3-year-old who has been profoundly neglected. So they keep pruning. We prune about a neuron a second. And nothing is stimulating that new growth. So this is not nice and just, a sort of a boost. This is real. We really do impact each other and impact each other's brains. And another interesting study, I think a couple of years ago by Biohacking, was when you think about leaders, these were people that were thinking about really good leaders, maybe up to even 30 years on. And they said, so what was it like? How were they to work for? And the parts of the brain that went on, those yellow and orange parts, are around connection, they're around collaboration, around positive thinking, around ideation, those sorts of things. Whereas if you had a boss who wasn't like that, someone who was autocratic or controlling or negative, then different parts of their brain lit up. There was none of the orange and the yellow. And the blue parts are around self-protection, shutting down, keeping to yourself, fear, anxiety, those sorts of things. So it was really interesting that this could be so many years after by thinking about those people. And there they were, embedded in these people's brains. So we do change each other a lot. Another thing to think about in organisations is that leaders who are very good at being able to adapt but also to connect have different brains. So this was a study a couple of years ago again around taking people who, before they're in a leadership position and actually instead going the other way and saying, let's have a look at how the people in this organisation that are in the kinds of situations where they're keen to take a role, team leader, those sorts of roles, and then cap them and watch how they interact with other people. And what they looked at was that some people are really good at engaging someone else. It's why we love storytellers. So they're really good at, when I talk to you, I'm lighting up those socio-emotional parts of my brain really strongly, and we can watch your brain start to light up in the same areas. And so this is a long-term study looking at those people that manage to engage other people, get them on board, get them aligned, and get them interested and fired up. Are they going to naturally become the leaders? And are they going to make better leaders than people that don't do that? So the way that we interact, the compassion and the capacity for human beings to have that interaction leads to all sorts of things that are very vital in how we interact in organisations, how we do our job. And what else have I thought of? Okay, so human-AI interaction, whenever people think about that, they normally think about things like phones. And yes, it is the biggest way that you interact. But just before I go into saying, so how does technology shape our brains, I just want to take you through some of the things that I guess I deal with in some of the projects that I now am involved in, or what I have to think about. So augmented intelligence is one of those things on the radar that is going to happen more and more in terms of the utilisation of AI to be able to assist us to do what we're doing. And it comes in all sorts of forms, whether it's on a screen, whether it's actually physical, in terms of doing a lot of things like construction and smart manufacturing. So there will be more and more in the way of how we augment what practices are carried out. Outsourced parenting is, believe me, because it's so lucrative, it is constantly on the rise. So just coming back from the US, I'm again reminded of just how prevalent that's becoming. This always freaks me out, the way that I just so often now watch and notice people who are trotting around with their, their 2-year-olds, their 1-year-olds, even earlier, and either they've got the phone or the adults have got the phone and the little child's looking at them and just wondering what to do. So yes, there's a lot around whether or not you give screens to kids, whether, what you do in that way, and I still would advocate don't to young children. But one of the things that's interesting that's bubbling up in this space is the family bot. So family bots are supposed to be there to increase communication and to increase the capacity for children to have things like good behaviour. Interestingly, to improve communication and good behaviour in your child, you need an awful lot of face-to-face, direct eye gaze and connection, which actually goes down when you have a family bot. So I do spend time in Silicon Valley talking to the roboticists about, isn't that interesting? So rather than saying, don't do that because you're going to, make a bunch of psychopaths, it's in the other way, it's to try and say, so if that's the case, what do we do to redesign a capacity for something like a family bot to actually allow for a higher amount of connection between that child and the family? So, yeah, of any sort for the parents. I work in defence in trusted autonomous systems. So for the Department of Defence in the US, I look at the interaction between the trusted autonomous robot and their soldier. And for Australia, I'm just about to do the ethical AI in defence workshop rules around the ethics of using AI in warfare. So there's some kind of, that's a deep dive stuff, but some of the really positive, interesting things as well are things like biobanking, which is taking parts of your, a lot of your different types of organs and almost banking them so that if something goes wrong, say with your liver or your kidneys, then we can grow another one. Biodosing. So anyone who's heard me talk about building new brain microbiome, second brain, the gut, you make a lot of the neurotransmitters in here to actually make your brain work through hosting bugs that create those kind of little Lego blocks to be able to make your brain work. And biodosing is actually taking things like fecal transplants. Lovely, we all hate that kind of thing, but it's really vital to have a very good environment in that enteric system so that you get the right bugs making the right Lego blocks so that your brain works well. And if you give fecal transplants of fat mice into thin mice, they'll get fat, or the other way around. If you have anxious mice, they can become calm. Calm mice can become anxious. And there's more and more, a lot of people who are very sick become much better when you give transplants of things like biodosing. So there's all sorts of things that open up in the world around that. VR and AR, more and more. So is VR the empathy machine? No, I don't think it is. We don't actually know yet, but it certainly isn't what we think. Is it emotionally engaging and exciting? Yes, absolutely. And it's fantastic for designing houses, for seeing a hospital before you go in to have an operation, for all sorts of things. So VR truly has some amazing capacities. Can you put a VR headset on and send your avatar to work? No, because within a very short space of time, because it's so excitatory, you're dumb as a box of hammers. So you're not really going to be very useful in your workplace. So there's really positive things about VR, but there's a lot of limitations as well. Robo-doping, so that's things like being able now for us to take parts of how we work. So robo-doping specifically is things like genetic changes or epigenetic changes so that your actual body grows more red blood cells. So you don't pick it up as doping, but you certainly can perform better. So that's an AI thing. This is an AI suit. So that person has her right leg, she's injured her right leg. What the AI suit can do is pick that up, and it can see that muscle is still weak. It can increase support in that area. It can increase heat in that area. And what they're now doing is getting that material to be able to deliver drugs into that area. So there's all sorts of things you can do that are really positive with AI. Biohacking is another thing that will become more and more of a sort of a job opportunity. This one's an amazing one in that this is actually a company that is now around. They presume that in about 2 years' time they'll be able to have the BioLens. So that's a lens that you take you take the lens out of your eye and you put this lens in instead. And actually it has positive health attributes because you don't get cataracts and you don't tend to get the lenses degrading after time. And it's got a micro camera in it. So one of the things you can do is, whereas you might not be able to read a clock at 10 feet, you can now read it at 30 feet because you can actually, move this camera. And so that we can already do. But what they're now looking at is, everyone's going, what they're looking at is things like connecting it to your phone or being able to swap pictures with other people, so that you actually really do see what they're seeing. So there's all sorts of things that are really fascinating in what we do. You can stand up, that's okay. Yeah. Do you want to do that again? So what we don't really have is things like the Neuralink. So there's this stuff about, can you upload your brain? No. Our brain basically starts at the top of our head and finishes at our feet. We've got millions of neurons all over the place. There's fantastic work on, because we've got a bundle of neurons in the heart, there's really interesting stuff around people that have heart transplants that actually have memories from other people. It's incredible. So this is, whatever. It's just a real... So, how does technology shape us? One of the things then to think about, because we are electrochemical bags, is that any medium that we use alters us. So before there was even writing, the parts of our brain that understood oral capability were actually larger and more chunked up. You can see it from fossils. And then when writing comes along, different parts of the brain and the body change to be able to do that. And as we get more and more electrical stimulus, then we are actually changing our brains. I'll take you through how we do that. One of the things to think about, though, is it's iterative. So not only, hopefully, are we changing technology, but also technology is changing us. And how many of us don't complain about what we now have to do to fit in with what the technology, makes us do, whether it's going through different kinds of processes to get somewhere or usability of the sort of technology. So hopefully it's going to be more iterative than it has been up to now, and we'll get better at actually being, companionable. One of the main reasons then to think about, especially if you're designing courses or thinking about skills, is a lot of it's due to attention. So when we pay attention, we actually synchronise a lot of the firing of the synapses in our brain. And the more interested you are, the more you synchronise those. So your brain changes in the way that it takes in information. And one of the problems that we get, we get expectation resonance. If you're really, really interested, and it's like taking the top off your brain and just pouring information in, and you feel like you're really absorbing it fast. And then what you're getting is expectation resonance. You actually get preemptive thinking. Your brain's leaping ahead, thinking, oh, is that also relevant? Is this also relevant? And that's when you get that speed up of being able to suck information in and really learn very fast. So when we engage, the chemicals that we get through that interest assist this. So it's an interesting process to watch. Unfortunately, one of the things that the phone is due to do, develop to do, is to distract us. So it creates inattention. Because our neurons can reset in as little as 6 seconds, then what we get with the technology is it stops that lovely abstraction phase of the brain being able to play with the information that it's taking in. So that daydreaming mode, again, we can watch it in an MRI. That allows the brain's actually really busy. You're staring out the window, you can say to people, I'm very busy, and you are, because your brain is working really hard. It's connecting all sorts of things it doesn't normally connect. That's the aha moment type of thing. And unfortunately, when you look at your phone, it stops dead. We can just watch it shut off. And it's because the brain goes into distraction. Either it goes to task, which is a different part of your brain, or you just play Candy Crush or something and it just kind of, it hops around and it just stops working deeply and it's just kind of, activity. And you might think that it's relaxing you, it's actually not. It's much more relaxing for the brain and the body and the organs to be daydreaming instead. So turn your phone off instead of doing that. So what the phone and what the computers and what technology in general does is it tends to increase cognitive load. And it's because of the way we take in information off screens, especially screens that are moving, screens that are live. But interestingly, now what we're able to do is look at things like the emotional processing and the executive attention areas. So I always get the questions, are people less empathic? Well, actually, yes. Are they less able to concentrate? Yes. So we've started to look at which parts of the brain are changed over the overuse of technology, which is, I think, on average 3 hours in under 2-year-olds, 9 hours by the time you're a day, I'm talking about, primary school, and up to 15 to 20, would you believe, sometimes for people that are in either high school or adult. Where do people get 15 hours and 20 hours? Anyway, so one of the things that happens then is because there's so much rapid switching, because your brain's always dealing with a number of things, the sorts of multitasking starts to weaken various specific things that happen in your brain. So with the empathic pathway, it might be that you've always been really self-centered, but otherwise it's a case of, yes, you are tending to think with a different lens and pick up less information because you don't pick up the cues from other people nearly as well either. So when you're in a workplace and you're not only not picking up the cues naturally, but you're also, texting when they're right there or emailing the person next to you, you're not even having the chance to be able to look and pick up those extra things. So that also cuts it down in the workplace. And the other thing is, because your brain gets really tired, your attention span is shorter. So we think we're really busy, but very often we're just doing stuff that's routine, like that riffling and stamping. And it's because a lot of organisations don't stop and say, right, if you need to do deep work, then we need to agree on what that deep work is, when you do it, and what you turn off, and that you won't be available. And it's a really critical discussion to have about your work. When do you do that deep work where you are not on call? Because otherwise you don't get people being able to do that. And it's a really critical part of the workplace. The other thing is willpower. So think about the brain like a muscle. The more you can bring it to a problem, the more strongly it deals with it and the better the outcome you get. So when we have a tired brain through things like addiction, and I was amazed at the stats of how many adults are still on their phone for various reasons during the night between 3 and 5 in the morning. And then the habits. So who's really good during the day? Then they go home at night, they're really tired, they've had a big work day, That's when you sit on the couch. That's when you have the red wine you didn't have during the day. That's when you go on eBay and buy rubbish that you don't really need. And those, it's because your willpower's just disappeared. So you're just tired. And it's also why, to an extreme, people don't get off the games and people don't stop connecting to social media and those sorts of things because their willpower is shot. They don't have that capacity to make good, robust decisions anymore. So having rules and management around a very sticky thing is really critical for human beings at work and outside work. So the willpower is a real issue. So after that, what's positive about technology? What does it offer us? So, and I'm an engineer, I love technology, I build apps and robots. And so if it's well resourced, then we get really good service. And that's taking in all sorts of the new things that we can utilise. So the facial recognition, the voice activation, the chatbots, although I'll tell you about chatbots and avatars, it's a really interesting piece of research. So convenience, who doesn't like things like online banking, those sorts of things, they're really great. And being able to Skype. I travel all the time and I'm always on a screen with a child. And people ask me about that. They ask me about the interaction. If you know someone, the interaction's richer. If you don't know some people, then there are parts of your brain that never turn on when you look at someone over a screen. So you have to have people who come together and connect and actually create that physical connection, then you can use screens as well. But it's never instead of, and we'll go into education on what that means. Data aggregation, brilliant. So this isn't a video because I never trust them, they never go on, but you can actually watch, if you go into this, this allows us to take all different sorts of data and put it up and out and watch it move depending on what we forecast and backcast. So those sorts of things, AI is brilliant. It's a very, very good tool. Huge speed, huge reach, and really good scalability. You've got to think about why you scale it. If you want to scale it for behaviour change, you also need the human connection consistently at different times in that process. And again, whether it's education, whether it's preventative health apps, we have to be smart about how much we need human interaction and how much we use technology to support and enable that, that connection. And assistance. So just to show you that I love tech, that's me with the Neo. So we're using Neo, about to use Neo in old folks and health hospitals. And what I'm going to be doing is capping, so EEG capping old people when they come face to face with Neo, but then keep the cap on and watch what happens when they then look at their trusted carer. Because there's different parts of the brain that are going to be engaged. And then over time, how does that change? So those sorts of things are the kinds of things that we're looking at now. Exactly, again, how do you interact with the human? Also, assistance, things like when I used to work for General Motors and I've worked in defence, so the old technologisation and robots were very different to the ones we can train now. And also, just really cool things. So that's a typewriter. So it looks really cool. It's terrific to use. I'll tell you though, you go back to the other one because of the things that it doesn't do. But we do constantly have very interesting new gadgets that we can use. And some of them we would not be without once we get used to using them. Just with that chatbot and avatar, really quickly, how much time have I got? I've got no clock. 10 minutes.
I'm sure too many people would want you to stop.
Okay. So interestingly, so I also talk to banks and large companies like this frequently about service and technologisation, and again what it means for skills, jobs, those sorts of things in the 20 to 30 years in the future, although who knows 20 to 30 years in the future. So what they did was they were trying to figure out whether people like the chatbot better or whether people like the avatar better. So who do you think likes the chatbot better? Hands. Nobody. One, sort of. Couple, right. And who do you think likes the avatar better? Okay, so a lot more. So it was fascinating. MIT did a study. So when they asked the question, and then they started to actually wire people up and assay chemicals, then you might say you like the avatar, because it's cool, isn't it? It's interesting. But when you actually look at the body and the way that the body and the brain interacts, we like the chatbot a lot more. And the reason is because of a number of things. So when we're trying to deal with an avatar, even though we know it's not human, the brain tussles all the time about exactly what it is and what to do with it. So what we end up with is a lower negative affect with the chatbot because the brain's not trying to work that out. We end up with less physiological reactions. So our cortisol actually goes up when we're dealing with an avatar, and various other things increase that are stress-related and anxiety-related. There's less of that uncanny valley stuff, but also, as soon as we try and put a voice into anything which is not human, we haven't got that right yet. You know, there's let's see, how much of a second? I can't remember, but it's well under a part of a second is that gap between us talking and something else actually registering that human beings, we don't do, you know, we're brilliant at all of that lovely connection that we just don't do yet with avatars and with robots. And we pick that up, and the brain's constantly trying to deal with that. So another aspect then to think about or remember is that we call it artificial intelligence, but it's still as dumb as slime. You know, it's really not intelligent. It should be artificial assistance or enablement. So, yeah, I'm constantly going, oh. The fact that brains do react differently to real faces and to avatars, and they're constantly having to kind of connect and correct and just make sure that they've still got the thing they think in front of them. And one of the rules of thumb is if it's an emotional issue, so, you know, the companies would say, okay, so I'll use the avatar for the first level of employment culling. No, because that's a really critical thing in connection with people. Okay, I'll use it with angry customers. No, because that's where they really want an engagement emotionally. They want to feel like they're being heard and listened to and connecting. So it's a really interesting process around when you do listen. So another thing at work to think about with skills in the future that's here already, but certainly is strengthening, is analytics, people analytics and aids. So this is a technical aid in a picking line, but what we're now going to is different kinds of technical aids. So one of the things I always find a laugh is what you can do now is to stop people to figure out whether people are being stressed. You can put a badge on them which registers in real time their heartbeat. Dynamically, the information goes back to your boss. How stressful is that? Or you can get the badges. So there's two different types we can think of. So in that picking line that we thought about, then what we can have is something which will, if we have, say, 10 seconds it should take to pick, I don't know, a broom and put it in, if you're picking that down the line, then at 9 seconds, this thing's quiet, it's pinned onto your overalls. At 10 seconds, it's beeping at you. And at 11 seconds, it's going, because you're slow. And what they're finding is a really high level already of stress, strain, workplace-related illness, anxiety. And another version is in an office. So, or a sales area, you know, white collar. And what that picks up is things like the proximity that you have to either your client or to another co-employee, and also your voice. And if your voice goes up, you're friendly. And if it doesn't, you're not. And then that information, again, goes back in real time to your boss. And so there's so many suppositions in there that are just wrong. Somewhat, because what we're trying to do is take a quality interaction and codify it, you know, quantify it, and dull it down and simplify it when we know that all sorts of things around what the jobs do for us and the value that we bring to a job cannot be codified. So we have to be really careful about the use of those. Brilliant data, absolutely wonderful data, so often in things like what people do, how often they do it, where they are, when they do it, you know, fantastic. But we've got to be really careful about what else we try and look at. Smart cities. So this is about a rice grain size thing that goes into your hand. I think Norway's probably got the highest level. So what you can do with that is it opens and shuts your door. It will put on your lights and put them off. You can photocopy. You could walk into the canteen and it knows you're in there and what you've got, and you can just walk out again and it's already taken the money out of your bank. So there's a really interesting kind of whole process. This person's using it to pay for their airline ticket. The downside of that is anything that can open a door can close it. Anything that can take money out of your bank can take money out of your bank. So yeah, it's really interesting. And I work in Silicon Valley as well. And yeah, as always, you know, they're kind of up that bubble extreme end with what you can do with technology. And I won't tell you how often I've had the discussions around, no, it's actually really invasive to try and get people to have an implantable in their brains. But they're, but, well, there's more than one company that's already doing it. So, yeah, it's a really interesting process. So that, it comes back again to that human trust stuff. It's really important to I guess, to leverage that. Are you moving because I should be stopping? Don't, okay. Oh, and what you measure. This was just a wonderful little story of someone who came home after a hip replacement with a stick that clocked up how many miles he moved. So he paid the little boy next door to go around the block with his stick. Brilliant. So, you know, you don't always get the information you think you're going to get. So, what we need to think about then in the future, and what some are thinking about a lot, and in some other countries even more, is about quality and quantity partnerships. So a quality partnership is something like this. It's a surgeon who is operating and has an AI piece on the glasses, and something happens. So that surgeon is able to say, give me the 3 best options. And that's where aggregation of AI is brilliant. So within seconds, basically, you can get data back. The decision is made by that surgeon, because the surgeon's got this chunked up years of knowledge and experience. But they can put that added really good quantified data together with it and make the best decision possible. So that is a quality relationship with technology. And they can also learn through that app. The quantity relationship is how much can we get out of digitizing something? So that's the Amazon Turk. You know, we can do 85% of this role. We can have it a computer do it or a robot do it. The 15%, we'll chunk that up. We'll put it on the market at between $5 and $20 an hour, and we'll get people to do it thousands of times. And again, we have issues already around what happens at work. And in fact, some of the places that go for the quantity, how much could we get out of using autonomy in the workplace, are getting statistics like, so one company that won't be named, last year they had 911 calls when people just mentally broke down at work, and 189 emergency workers had to come out because of suicide attempts because of employees. So there are times when you just push it really the wrong way, but there are other times, most of the time, when using technology to augment what we do is brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. Okay, so you have to think about when a human is better. I'm going to run through these quickly now, because I just wanted to get to so the human's much better than that kind of creepy nurse who's a robot. And then the when is technology better? So again, my work in defence, there's definitely times when you use robots and you use, I guess, technology. And then you have to think about what is best. So rule of thumb, as I said before, when someone is emotionally stimulated, so they're either happy and wanting to tell you something or they're worried, then that's when you have that direct connection with a human. So it's a really good way to think about it. Are they trying to be creative or positive? Do they have something which is an issue? That's when you can't beat the humans, all that complex problem-solving stuff. Okay, I'll go through. I was going to talk about you need to think about when you need to do what with people and the medium. What I'll do is give you these slides, because one of the fascinating things about delivering content around skills is that the way that we do it changes the way that the brain uses it. So visual, 60% of information, but you put it in a different way. Voice is actually really interesting in that we keep it longer because it's very evocative. So podcasts is why we like things like podcasts so much, because we can use our imagination, so we map it differently. But information on screens or text on a screen, there's a number of things to think about. So we don't go back and backtrace it, we just really skim over the top of it. Whereas in a book is like a map, right? Right from the beginning, you know if it's big, little, you know where things are in it, so your brain builds up this picture where you keep the information differently. Another thing we do over text is that we actually go back and rescan. So if we watch people's eyes, When they're looking at paper, they can rescan up to 20 times on a line because we're trying to take it in and actually put it into memory. Whereas on a screen, you just tend to look over it. And also the screen's moving and changing all the time, so we get mentally tired. So it's why we still print things out. It's why students still print things out whenever they have to actually deal with a draft. It's a different thing for your brain. So I can go through this. We have different kinds of tasks that are expected by 2025, so it's not that we're going to be, neck and neck at all. So for all the reasons, that's just a summary that I've just talked about, we really do need the human, and also that we need to think about the fact that at the moment, we still design the technology, whether it's an app or whatever else it is, and so we still have those flaws that humans design in. And things like recruitment apps, very often they're abandoned because they just don't get the same quality of people. All right, so the future careers, last slide, I promise. You have the humanics then, it's called. So what we're now looking at is things like humanities and STEM and robotics. And people talk about what basic skills do they need, but the thing that interested me is, yes, we've got STEAM, but the second thing internationally is humanities, and the third is definitely trades. So it's something that for years we let go, globally, everybody. And the thing is, I work in tech, you need people to fix the tech all the time. You don't just need designers and coders. And you're going to need it more and more. So it's a thing we really have to bulk up. It's why places like TAFE are so critical. And it's why the NCVER gets the kind of data it gets. And it's why we need to really think about that. And then along with the actual technical trade, then it's the sorts of things you've probably heard about the critical thinking, the complex thinking, the entrepreneurship. As long as the entrepreneurship isn't just a reason to push people out and say, so make your own job. And that's a conversation. And also the cultural agility. So I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I'm on the AI committee in Finland, the first question they asked me wasn't one around robotics or being an engineer. It was actually much more the anthropological question. The first question to me was, so how do we align Eastern, Western and Middle Eastern values around technologisation going forward? Brilliant question. I wanted to go and move there immediately. Never been asked that here. So those are the kind of things that we need to really think about at a much bigger sort of stage. So we think about how we work, the ways that we work. We can think about what actual employment looks like, what the capacity is, what value is, what productivity is. Because, yes, people move out of old jobs, but we've got masses of jobs that we need done by humans that can't be technologised. We think about what that means for even things like the living wage, so we just put that in Finland last year. And even there, it's not getting paid to sit on the couch because you don't feel useful and bonded. It's being paid to go and do some of those really interesting types of different jobs, which means public policy has to fund and has to turn and has to equilibrate that sort of thing across the society, instead of just some people getting very rich and a lot of people just losing their jobs and not getting supported. And that means, hopefully, that we'll end up with truly a human-centric future. Thank you.